I never thought of myself as the kind of man who would end up in a situation like this. My life had always been simple: work hard, love my wife, and trust my best friend. But as I sat across from Ethan that night, sipping whiskey in the dim light of our favorite bar, I had no idea my world was about to unravel. Ethan and I had been friends since college, inseparable for over 15 years. He was the best man at my wedding, my confidant, and the one person I trusted more than anyone outside of my wife, Claire. We had built our lives alongside each other, sharing victories and defeats, laughter and heartache. So, when he leaned in that night, voice low and troubled, I braced myself for something serious. "Luke, I need to tell you something," he said, running a hand through his thick, dark hair. His eyes, normally full of confidence, darted around nervously. "And you have to promise me you won't judge me." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Ethan. Since when have I judged you for anything?" He hesitated before exhaling heavily. "I've been having an affair." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. Ethan wasn't the kind of guy to be unfaithful. Sure, he had always been a flirt, but he loved his wife, Jessica. At least, I thought he did. Jesus, Ethan. Jessica. Do you even love her? He groaned and rubbed his face. Of course I do. It's not like that, Luke. It just happened. And I feel guilty as hell about it. But at the same time, I can't stop. She's intoxicating. Every time I tell myself it's over, I find myself back in her arms. I took a long sip of my drink, trying to process what he was telling me. How long? He hesitated, then muttered, "Almost 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of sneaking around. Lying. Deception." I shook my head, feeling an unexpected mix of anger and disappointment. "Ethan, that's not just a mistake. That's a second life you're leading. Does Jessica know?" "No. And I don't plan to tell her," he admitted, his voice tight. "I needed to talk to someone, and you're the only one I trust." I sighed, torn between my loyalty to my friend and my own moral compass. "You need to end it, man. It's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down." He nodded, but something in his eyes told me he wasn't ready to let go. "You're right. I know you are. I just—" He trailed off, staring into his glass. The conversation weighed on me as I drove home that night. Claire was already asleep when I got in, her dark hair fanned out over the pillow, her breathing soft and steady. I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying Ethan's words over and over in my mind. He was playing with fire, and I feared he was going to get burned. The next few days, I couldn't shake the unease Ethan's confession had left me with. Every time I saw Jessica, I felt a pang of guilt, knowing what her husband was doing behind her back. And every time I saw Claire, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that our marriage was built on trust. But then things started to change. Claire had been distant lately, distracted. She was always on her phone, texting late at night, smiling at something on the screen when she thought I wasn't looking. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. She had been putting in longer hours at the marketing firm, after all. But then there were the little things, missed calls that she brushed off as unimportant, a shift in the way she kissed me, a new perfume she had never worn before. My gut told me something was off, but I pushed the thought away. Claire wasn't the type to stray. We had been together for 10 years, and I had never once doubted her loyalty. It wasn't until I saw her standing outside a cafe one afternoon, deep in conversation with a man I couldn't quite place, that the first real crack formed in my trust. She was laughing, her hand grazing his arm in a way that felt too intimate. My stomach twisted, but I told myself I was overreacting. After all, I had no reason not to trust her. At least, that's what I thought. Ethan and I met up again later that week. He seemed more relaxed than before, but there was still a nervous energy about him. "I ended it," he said before I even sat down. "It was the right thing to do." I exhaled in relief. "Good. That's good, man. You don't need that kind of weight on your shoulders." He nodded, but then he did something that sent a chill down my spine. He glanced at me, hesitated, and then looked away, almost guilty. Something was wrong. And I had no idea that I was about to step into the middle of my own worst nightmare. Ethan's hesitation stayed with me long after we parted ways that evening. It gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, turning over and over in my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. His confession had been too abrupt, too rehearsed. Something wasn't right. That night, Claire came home late again. I was sitting in the living room, nursing a glass of bourbon, waiting. I heard her keys jingle in the lock, the soft creak of the door opening, and the unmistakable rustle of her coat being hung up. She hesitated when she saw me sitting there. "You're up," she said lightly, offering me a small smile. I studied her, her carefully composed expression, the way she kept her hands tucked behind her back, the faint scent of a musky cologne clinging to her clothes that wasn't mine. My stomach twisted. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, setting her purse down. "Long day at work." I let the words settle between us, weighing them. Claire had always been a terrible liar. She over-explained, avoided eye contact, fidgeted. And right now, she was fidgeting, playing with the delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, the one I had given her for our anniversary last year. "Want a drink?" I asked, lifting the bottle. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I think I'll just head to bed." I watched her retreat down the hallway, her movements too quick, too eager to escape the conversation. The pit in my stomach deepened. The next morning, I woke up to find Claire already gone. A hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter read, "Early meeting. Love you." I stared at the words, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth. Claire had never been the type to leave notes. She usually woke me up, kissed my forehead before heading out. This felt off. My phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Ethan, you free tonight? Need to talk." I hesitated before replying. "Me, yeah. Same bar." "Ethan, no. My place." That was strange. We always met at the bar. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed. "Me, okay. See you at 7. The day dragged on, my thoughts consumed by Claire's strange behavior and Ethan's sudden urgency. By the time evening rolled around, I was wound tight with suspicion. Ethan's apartment was across town, a sleek bachelor pad despite the fact that he was married. He opened the door before I could knock, his face drawn and pale. "Come in," he muttered, stepping aside. I entered, the scent of whiskey hanging heavy in the air. A half-empty glass sat on the coffee table, next to an open bottle. "What's going on?" I asked, taking a seat. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "I need to tell you something, Luke. And I don't know how to say it." A cold weight settled in my gut. "Just say it." He exhaled sharply, stopping in front of me. "I lied." My pulse quickened. "Lied about what?" "The woman I was having an affair with." The room seemed to shrink around me. A terrible realization clawed at the edges of my mind, but I refused to let it in. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Ethan swallowed hard, then met my gaze. "It's Claire." Silence. Deafening. Crippling. I felt the world tilt on its axis, my breath trapped in my chest. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. "No," I said automatically. "You're wrong." Ethan looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "I wish I was." I stood, my hands curling into fists. "You're lying." "I'm not." Anger exploded inside me, a violent, suffocating force. I grabbed the whiskey glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the apartment. "How long?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Ethan closed his eyes. 6 months. The same time frame he had given me before. It all clicked, the secrecy, the distance, the strange perfume. Claire. My wife. My best friend. Bile rose in my throat. I turned, storming toward the door. "Luke, wait." But I didn't. I drove home in a haze, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out all other noise. When I got home, Claire was in the kitchen, casually sipping tea like nothing had happened. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early." I stared at her, my vision blurring at the edges. "Sit down." Her brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" I stepped closer. "Sit down." She hesitated, then complied, setting her mug aside. "Luke, you're scaring me." I leaned over the table, gripping the edge so hard my fingers ached. "How long have you been sleeping with Ethan?" All the color drained from her face. She flinched, her mouth opening, but no words came out. And in that moment, I had my answer. The truth stood between us, raw and ugly, changing everything. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. Claire stared at me, her face frozen in a mask of shock. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, spin some ridiculous lie to salvage what little was left. But then, something in her broke. Her shoulders slumped, and her gaze fell to the floor. I felt something inside me shatter. "Say something," I said, my voice dangerously low. She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting together in her lap. The word stuck in her throat. "Don't lie to me, Claire." A long silence stretched between us. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry." The world around me blurred. I had expected anger, guilt, maybe even tears, but not this. Not a weak, feeble sorry. "That's it." I laughed bitterly. "That's all you have to say to me?" She lifted her eyes, and I saw the truth in them. It was real. It had been real. The affair, the betrayal, the lies. It wasn't just some meaningless mistake. "How long?" I demanded. She hesitated, and something inside me snapped. I slammed my fist on the table, making her flinch. "How long, Claire?" 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. The exact number Ethan had given me. My stomach twisted violently, a mix of rage and heartbreak churning inside me like poison. "Do you love him?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, as if it didn't belong to me. Claire's breath hitched. I don't know." I gritted my teeth. "Wrong answer." She ran a trembling hand through her hair. "Luke, I never meant for this to happen." I let out a humorless laugh. "Right. You just tripped and fell into his bed." Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like," I spat. "Tell me why my best friend was fucking my wife behind my back." Her lower lip trembled. "It started when you got so busy with work. You were always tired, always distracted. I felt like we were just going through the motions. And then Ethan," she broke off, shaking her head. "He was just there. He listened. He made me feel wanted." I stared at her in disbelief. "So, because I was working my ass off for us, you decided to fuck my best friend?" She wiped at her eyes. "I didn't plan it, Luke. It just happened." I let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Of course. That's always how these stories go, isn't it? It just happened." A thick silence settled between us. I ran a hand down my face, my chest heaving. I needed to get out of here. Away from her. Away from this. "I can't look at you right now," I muttered, pushing back from the table. Claire stood abruptly. "Luke, please." I held up a hand. "Don't." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring into streaks against the windshield. My hands trembled against the wheel, my mind replaying every moment of the past 10 years with Claire, every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise. And now, it was all a lie. I pulled into a deserted parking lot and let my head fall against the steering wheel. The weight of it all came crashing down on me. Claire and Ethan. My wife and my best friend. The two people I trusted most in this world. I let out a shuddering breath, then punched the dashboard. Pain shot through my knuckles, but I barely felt it. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I couldn't go home. Not yet. I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streetlights flickered outside, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. My mind raced, bouncing between rage and disbelief. Claire had betrayed me. Ethan had betrayed me. Everything I had built, my marriage, my friendships, my life, had been a lie. I needed answers. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and scrolled to Ethan's number. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to hear what he had to say? No. But I had to. I hit call. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then, finally, his voice came through. Luke. He sounded tense, hesitant, like he had been expecting this call. Where are you? I asked, my voice eerily calm. A pause. Home. Stay there. I ended the call before he could respond and pulled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. Ethan lived in a modern apartment on the other side of the city, a place he had moved into after he and Jessica separated 6 months ago. 6 months. The same timeline of his affair with Claire. The thought made my blood boil. I parked outside his building, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the cold night air. My heart pounded against my ribs as I walked up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached his door, my hands were shaking. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, like he had been waiting. Ethan stood there, barefoot, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked like hell, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. Luke, he breathed. I didn't wait for an invitation. I pushed past him and stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of whiskey. A half-empty bottle sat on the coffee table, next to a glass with melted ice. He closed the door behind me and turned, running a hand through his messy hair. I guess Claire told you. I clenched my jaw. She didn't have to. Ethan swallowed hard. Luke, listen. No, I snapped. You listen. I stepped closer, barely holding myself back. You were my best friend. My brother. I trusted you more than anyone, and you. My voice cracked. I swallowed the lump in my throat and steadied myself. You betrayed me. He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. I know. No, you don't, I growled. You don't get to just say that and think it makes a difference. Silence. Ethan sat down on the couch, rubbing his temples. I never wanted this to happen. I let out a bitter laugh. Funny, Claire said the same thing. His face twisted in pain. Luke, I swear to you, I never meant to hurt you. Bullshit, I spat. If you cared about me, about Jessica, about Claire, you never would have done this. He flinched. I know. I stared at him, my chest rising and falling rapidly. Then why? Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I don't have a good answer for that. He let out a long breath. At first it was just talking. She was unhappy, Luke. She felt like you were drifting away. And he shook his head. I was a coward. I should have stopped it before it started. I clenched my fists. But you didn't. No, he admitted. I didn't. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. My thoughts were spiraling. I had come here for answers, but none of this made me feel any better. I looked back at him. Do you love her? Ethan flinched at the question. His lips parted, but no words came. That hesitation told me everything. A fresh wave of anger crashed over me. You son of a bitch. Ethan stood suddenly. I don't know, Luke. Okay. I don't fucking know what this is. But I know that I hate myself for it. I took a step forward, fists tightening at my sides. Not enough to stop. His face twisted in pain. No, he admitted, his voice breaking. Not enough to stop. I stared at him, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had never hit anyone in my life. Not in college, not in school. But right now, every muscle in my body screamed for violence. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step back. If I hit you, I muttered, my voice dangerously low, it's not going to change anything. Ethan swallowed hard. I know. I turned toward the door. My hands were shaking. My chest felt hollow. Luke, Ethan said behind me. I paused. I'm sorry. I didn't turn around. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't go home. I drove for hours, the city blurring past me. I parked by the river, watching the reflection of the streetlights ripple on the dark water. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Divorce? I couldn't picture my life without Claire, but the thought of touching her again made my skin crawl. And Ethan. I squeezed my eyes shut. I had lost 2 people tonight. The 2 people I trusted most. There was no coming back from this. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. The cold wind blew across the riverbank, but I didn't feel it. I was numb. Completely and utterly numb. I sat by the river for what felt like hours, staring at the dark water. My mind was a battlefield, memories colliding, emotions warring, everything unraveling faster than I could hold it together. Claire. Ethan. 6 months. How many times had I kissed her, touched her, made love to her while she was thinking of him? How many times had they laughed behind my back, knowing I was oblivious? My phone buzzed again. I sighed and pulled it out of my pocket. Claire. I almost let it ring out, but something inside me, some sick, masochistic part, made me answer. I didn't say anything. Luke. Her voice was small, uncertain. I exhaled through my nose. What? She hesitated. Where are you? I almost laughed. Does it matter? Of course it matters, she said softly. You just walked out. I didn't know if you were coming back. I pinched the bridge of my nose. What do you want, Claire? Her breath hitched. I just wanted to talk. I clenched my jaw. About what? Us. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Us? There is no us, Claire. Not anymore. Luke, please, she whispered. I need you to come home. Home. The word felt foreign. I closed my eyes. I'll come back, I said finally. But not for you. A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, Okay. I hung up. By the time I pulled into our driveway, it was past midnight. The house was dark except for a single light in the living room. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the wheel, bracing myself. Then I got out. Claire was waiting inside, sitting on the couch, arms wrapped around herself. She looked fragile, like a ghost of the woman I had married. I shut the door behind me and leaned against it, crossing my arms. Talk. She flinched at my tone but nodded. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. You can't. Her face crumpled. Luke, I love you. I barked out a laugh. You love me. That's rich. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I never stopped loving you. I scoffed. You have a funny way of showing it. She wiped at her eyes. I was lonely, Luke. You shut me out. I tried to reach you, and you were always somewhere else. I clenched my jaw. So you turned to Ethan. She hesitated. Yes. The raw honesty stung worse than a lie. I shook my head. Do you love him? She inhaled sharply, eyes wide. Tell me the truth, Claire. She looked down. I don't know. My chest tightened. That was the worst possible answer. I ran a hand through my hair. I can't do this, I muttered. I can't be in this house with you. Her breath hitched. What are you saying? I met her gaze, my voice cold. I want a divorce. Her face crumbled completely. No, she whispered. No, Luke, please. I held up a hand. Don't beg. Not after everything. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I made a mistake. You made a choice. She shook her head, her whole body trembling. I can't lose you. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. You already did. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving her crying in the living room. I didn't sleep. I lay on our bed, my bed, because it no longer felt like ours, staring at the ceiling, listening to Claire's muffled sobs from the other room. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even vindication. But all I felt was empty. By morning, I had made my decision. I packed a bag, threw in some clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop. I wasn't staying here another second. When I stepped out into the hallway, Claire was waiting. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. You're leaving, she said hollowly. Yes. She reached out like she wanted to touch me, then dropped her hand. Where will you go? I don't know. She swallowed hard. Can we at least talk about this? Please. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. We talked last night. That wasn't talking, she said desperately. That was you punishing me. I exhaled sharply. And what the hell do you call what you did to me? She flinched. I stepped past her, but she grabbed my wrist. Don't, I said warningly. She let go immediately, but her tears started falling again. I love you, Luke. I love you. I shook my head. You loved us. But you destroyed us. I turned and walked to the door. As I opened it, she whispered, "Goodbye." I didn't respond. I walked out and didn't look back. I drove without a destination, my mind a mess of emotions. Anger, betrayal, loss. By the time the sun rose fully, I found myself at a motel on the outskirts of town. I checked in, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. Everything was over. My marriage, my friendship, my life as I knew it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to break. And for the first time in years, I cried. I woke up in the dim motel room, my body aching, my mind foggy. The cheap curtains let in slivers of morning light, casting long shadows across the room. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, but I ignored it. I already knew who it was. Claire. Maybe Ethan. I wasn't ready to face either of them. Sitting up, I rubbed my face, trying to shake off the weight pressing down on my chest. My world had been turned upside down in a matter of days. My marriage, my friendship, everything I had believed in, it was all gone. I forced myself into the shower, letting the hot water scald away the remnants of last night's emotions. I needed to think, needed a plan. I couldn't just stay in a motel forever, running from the wreckage of my life. By the time I stepped out, my phone had stopped buzzing, but a single text message remained on the screen. Claire, please come home. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Talk. We had done enough talking. She had made her choices. Ethan had made his. Now, I had to make mine. By noon, I was driving aimlessly again, the familiar roads feeling foreign. I found myself outside of Jessica's apartment. She was the last person I wanted to see, but at the same time, I needed to know how she was holding up. Taking a deep breath, I knocked. Jessica opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw me, something in her expression softened. "Luke," she whispered. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. The apartment was small but warm. Pictures of her and Ethan still hung on the walls, a cruel reminder of what was lost. Jessica sat on the couch, hugging a pillow. "Did you talk to him?" I exhaled sharply. "Yeah." She nodded, as if she already knew. I don't understand. I thought we were happy. I thought." She trailed off, her voice breaking. I sat across from her, leaning forward. "So did I." Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that didn't need words. Finally, Jessica let out a shaky breath. "I feel like a fool." I shook my head. "You're not a fool. They are." She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine. "What now?" I ran a hand through my hair. "I don't know. Divorce, I guess." Jessica swallowed. "Yeah. Same here." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Guess we have that in common now." She smiled weakly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you think it was real? What they had?" I clenched my jaw. "I don't know. And I don't care." Jessica nodded. "I wish I could say the same." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on us. When I finally stood to leave, Jessica grabbed my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I gave her a small nod. "Take care, Jess." As I walked out, I realized I had no home to go back to. No wife waiting for me. No best friend to call. But maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork, empty nights, and trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered. Claire tried to call me countless times, but I never answered. The only communication I had with her was through lawyers. Ethan reached out once. A pathetic, drunken voicemail I deleted without listening to the end. Jessica and I stayed in touch, though. Not because of some tragic bond of shared betrayal, but because we understood each other. She was hurting just as much as I was. Sometimes we met for coffee, talking about everything except them. It helped. One evening, as I sat in my new, nearly empty apartment, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The past was behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt free. It would take time to heal. Time to trust again. But I would get there. And I wouldn't look back.